I don't usually talk about this part. Most people who know me, like really know me, have read my book or seen the podcast interviews or watched the panel clips where I talk about growing up with parents who sent me to live with strangers. It's become this clean little narrative: abandoned at 12, ran away at 15, wrote my way out. End scene. Applause. Inspirational quote. But that's not the full story. Not even close. I'm 32 now. I live in a yellow painted apartment that smells like cinnamon and old books. I have a second book out, a third on the way, and my name's on the spine of real novels in real bookstores. From the outside, it looks like I made it. But the truth? Some nights I still double check the locks on my door. I still flinch when an unknown number pops up on my phone. I still get this weird, hollow feeling on my birthday, like I'm bracing for someone to disappoint me all over again, even though no one ever does now. I guess I'm writing this because I've realized there's a part of the story I never told. Not in my book. Not on stage. Not in classrooms when I talk to kids who think they're unlovable because someone made them feel that way. And honestly, I think it's time. Because the day I got on that bus at 15 didn't magically fix everything. Yeah, I found my voice. Yeah, I started building a life. But escaping the people who broke me didn't mean I suddenly knew how to be a person. What came next was messy, and beautiful, and terrifying, and real. This is the part no one claps for. The part that doesn't fit in an Instagram caption. The part where the girl who ran away actually has to figure out what to do with the freedom she fought so hard to earn. This is everything that happened after I said, I'm not going back. If you're still here, and you want to know the rest, I'll tell it. But fair warning, it's not all healing montages and poetic justice. Sometimes the hardest part isn't escaping. It's surviving after. I was 12 when my parents sat me down at the kitchen table and told me I'd be going to live with another family. They called it an opportunity. They called it good for me. They didn't call it what it really was: abandonment. It was a gray Tuesday. I remember that because the sky outside the window looked like the inside of a storm cloud, and my dad kept glancing at it like the weather would save him from what he was about to say. My mom had made tea not because she wanted to comfort me, but because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. Her cup sat untouched, growing cold. Mine steamed between my fingers. "Sweetheart," my dad began, "you know how much we love you, right?" That sentence always means the opposite of what it says. I didn't respond. I just looked at him. My parents weren't cruel in the way movies portray villains. They didn't scream or hit. They just quietly erased me, bit by bit. And now they were preparing for the final act. "There's a family a few towns over. Friends of ours," he said. "They have a lovely home, and, well, they don't have children of their own. They've offered to host you for a while." Host me. Like I was a foreign exchange student, not their daughter. I blinked. "Why?" My mom opened her mouth, then closed it. My dad cleared his throat and leaned forward like this made him sincere. "Your mom's work schedule is intense. Mine too. We're not home enough. You deserve structure, routine, a stable environment." It sounded like a script. I wondered how many times they rehearsed it. Probably in that same kitchen, late at night, whispering over wine while I was asleep in the next room. "But I'm not a project," I said. My voice came out small, weak. "I'm your daughter." My mom flinched like I'd hit her. "We're doing what's best for you," she whispered. And, just like that, it was done. The conversation didn't last more than 15 minutes. There were no tears. No negotiation. No, if you don't want to, you don't have to. It was already decided. I was leaving. The family they sent me to were the Harlans. Rich, religious, and performatively polite. On the surface, they were everything my parents weren't: warm, affectionate, always home. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Their house was 3 times the size of ours. A white colonial with black shutters and a perfect lawn that looked like it had never been stepped on. Inside, everything smelled like lemon polish and fake cinnamon. The air felt tight, like I had to hold my breath to not disturb the harmony. Mrs. Harland greeted me with a hug that lasted 2 seconds too long. Mr. Harland shook my hand like I was applying for a job. And just like that, I was part of their household. Sort of. The first night, I unpacked my things in the guest room. It wasn't a kid's room. There were no posters, no carpet stains, no crooked drawings taped to the wall. Just a four-post bed with white sheets, a stiff armchair in the corner, and a lamp that hummed when you turned it on. The closet had space. Too much space. My clothes barely filled a third of it. Dinner that night was roasted chicken, buttered peas, and mashed potatoes served in polished white dishes like it was Thanksgiving. The Harlans bowed their heads before eating. "Lord, we thank you for the blessing of family," Mr. Harlan said aloud. "And for the gift of welcoming this young girl into our home. Not my name. Not Olivia. Just this young girl." I felt like a guest on display. In school, no one knew what to make of me. I was the new girl, but I wasn't new to the area, just imported from 2 towns over. I didn't say much. I didn't have the energy. I missed my room. I missed the sound of my parents arguing in the next room. I missed my mom's tea, even if it was always overbrewed and bitter. I missed belonging. At night, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, waiting for a text or a call. Something from my parents. But it didn't come. They checked in once a week. A short phone call on Sunday evenings. 5 to 10 minutes. Questions like, "How's school? Are you eating okay? You like the Harlans, don't you?" Like they were trying to convince themselves. I lied. I said everything was fine. I said I understood. I said thank you. And every time I hung up, I felt a little more erased. The Harlans were strict. Not violent. Not cruel. But controlled. Everything was about order. Meals at exact times. No shoes in the house. Lights out by 9:30. You had to ask to use the phone. Internet was filtered and limited. No locked doors. And church. Always church. Every Sunday. No exceptions. I didn't mind religion. I minded how performative it all was. How they smiled wider when other people were watching. How Mrs. Harland would grip my shoulder tighter when introducing me to others. "This is Olivia. She's like a daughter to us." Like. Not is. One afternoon, I got home from school to find Mrs. Harland in my room, folding my laundry. It wasn't the laundry that got to me, it was the way she was reading one of my notebooks. A private one. The kind where I wrote things I didn't want to say out loud. I froze in the doorway. She looked up, startled but not apologetic. "I just wanted to make sure you weren't bottling things up," she said. I didn't respond. I didn't yell. I just took the notebook from her hands and walked out. That was when the shift happened. Not all at once, subtly, like a glass cracking slowly under pressure. The Harlans started watching me more closely. Mr. Harland asked about my attitude. Mrs. Harland offered more hugs that felt more like traps. I knew then, I wasn't their daughter. I was their project. Their example. Proof to their church friends that they were good people. That they were charitable. I was their charity case. On my 14th birthday, my parents didn't call. They sent a card. No money. Just their names in dry, black ink. No message. Not even, "We miss you." I stared at the card for a long time. Then I burned it in the fireplace. That night, I decided I wouldn't go back. I didn't know where I'd go yet. I had no plan. But I knew that whatever future I had, it didn't involve returning to people who handed me off like a library book. Or people who used me to feel holy. I didn't cry on my 14th birthday. I thought I might. I thought the emptiness would crack me open. But no, I just sat on the edge of the guest bed, holding the stiff little card my parents had mailed me. Their handwriting looked awkward, like even that cost them effort. "Happy birthday, Olivia. Hope you're doing well. Love, Mom and Dad." It was a note you'd leave for a coworker you barely remembered from the holiday party. No phone call. No small gift. Not even a message on the answering machine. Nothing. I stared at the card for a long while. Then, without thinking too hard, I stood, walked downstairs, and threw it into the fireplace. I watched the edges curl inward, blacken, and vanish into a wisp of gray. That moment didn't change my world, it just confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't going back. Not ever. After that, I stopped answering their calls. At first, I let them go to voicemail. Then I blocked the number entirely. I waited to feel guilt or fear or anger. But what I felt was nothing, which scared me more than anything. The Harlans noticed the shift. Mrs. Harland became extra gentle, overly concerned. She kept hovering, knocking before entering, but not waiting for an answer. She started making Olivia's favorite meals even though she didn't know what those were. I could see it in her eyes. She didn't like not having control. One evening after dinner, she set down her fork and smiled at me too sweetly. "Olivia, dear, I know it's hard, but maybe it's time to reconnect with your parents. They must be worried sick." I chewed slowly, looked up at her, and said, "They didn't call me on my birthday." Silence. Mr. Harland cleared his throat. Mrs. Harland blinked rapidly. "They probably just got busy," she offered weakly. "They forgot," I replied. "And I don't want to talk about it anymore." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something behind her perfect church lady's smile. Offense. I had upset the story she told herself. That she was saving me. That this was love. The only place that started to feel normal was school. Not because I liked it, I didn't, but because it was the one place where I wasn't being watched like a hawk or judged like a case study. I found a corner in the library and made it mine. The librarian, a gray-haired woman with glasses so thick they looked bulletproof, started leaving me be. She never asked questions. She just smiled when I came in and gave me space. That's where I met Quinn. He wasn't like the other kids, loud, obsessed with sports or phones, or who kissed who at whose party. Quinn was quiet, observant. He read the kind of books where everyone dies at the end, and he never seemed afraid to be alone. We didn't become instant friends. We became familiar. It started with eye contact, then occasional nods. Then one afternoon, I saw him staring at the same book I had just checked out 2 days before, The Bell Jar. "You're gonna hate the ending," I muttered, passing him. He smirked. "I usually do." That was it. A bridge built in 10 words. Quinn and I didn't talk much about our lives, not right away. Instead, we talked about books, music, and how terrible the school lunches were. Sometimes we'd share earbuds in the back of the library and listen to whole albums in silence. One day, during lunch, I offhandedly mentioned how the Harlans made us all pray before meals, even at home. "They make you?" he asked, raising a brow. I shrugged. "It's just easier than arguing." "Do you believe in all that?" I hesitated. "I think I believe in something. But I don't think it looks like what they believe in." He nodded like he understood. "They sound like curators, not parents." That stopped me. "What do you mean?" "You know. Like, they don't want to raise you. They want to display you." That line would echo in my head for weeks. Because it was exactly right. The Harlans didn't like that I'd made a friend they didn't approve. When I started spending more time at school, volunteering for after-school projects, pretending to need help with homework I already finished, they noticed. One night at dinner, Mr. Harland asked too casually, "Who is this?" "Quinn." I didn't answer. "I hear he's in detention quite a bit," he added. "He's not," I said firmly. Mrs. Harland jumped in. "Sweetheart, we know it's hard, but we want to make sure you're making good choices. Your parents trusted us to." "They sent me away," I snapped. Silence. And I didn't apologize. They took away my computer. They blocked most websites on the house network. My phone, which they had bought me, was now restricted. I could only call pre-approved numbers. Quinn wasn't on the list. They called it protection. I called it prison. At school, I told Quinn everything. Not dramatically. Not crying. Just facts. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened. That's why I trusted him. "Why don't you tell a teacher?" he asked once. I shrugged. "Tell them what?" "That my guardians are polite, rich, and pray before dinner." He nodded. "They'd never believe you." Exactly. I started writing again. Not just journal entries, real writing. Short stories. Fiction. Poems that didn't rhyme. Some were violent. Some were heartbreaking. Most were about girls who vanished and were never found. One of my English teachers, Ms. Rowe, noticed. She asked if she could share one of my stories with a writing contest for local high schoolers. I said yes. I didn't expect to win anything. 2 weeks later, I was called to the office. My heart dropped. The secretary handed me an envelope with my name on it. Inside was a letter. I'd placed first in the regional youth fiction competition. There was going to be a reception. a reading, and a small scholarship attached. I remember standing there, holding that letter, feeling like the floor had tilted. Someone saw me. Someone liked what I had to say. When the Harlans found out, they acted proud. Mrs. Harland gushed about how she always knew I had a gift. Mr. Harland told the pastor at church. But I watched the way they shifted the narrative. How quickly Olivia won a writing contest became, we helped Olivia discover her talent. I stopped reading aloud at dinner. They noticed. One night, after another long prayer and overly dry pot roast, Mr. Harland said, "You seem to be spending a lot of time in your head lately." I didn't answer. "We don't want you becoming bitter." "Bitter?" I asked. "For what?" He cleared his throat. "For having a better life than you would have had." I stared at him. And in that moment, I realized something. They didn't just think they saved me. They thought I owed them my silence. That night, I pulled out a blank notebook and wrote a title at the top of the first page. The Exit Plan. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I was going to leave. On my terms. Quietly. Without a fight. Without a scene. I wasn't going to scream or burn down bridges. I was going to walk away so cleanly that by the time they realized I was gone, I'd already be somewhere they couldn't reach me. And I wasn't ever coming back. I kept the notebook hidden beneath the lining of my bottom drawer, tucked between old socks and a pair of gloves I'd never worn. It lay there like a quiet rebellion. Each night, after the Harlans went to bed, I'd write one more line in it. Sometimes it was a real idea, a plan, a date. Other times, it was just a sentence, not forever. Or, they don't get to keep you. Every word felt like loosening a knot inside me. The idea of running away wasn't new. I'd thought about it since the day I arrived. But now I had something I didn't have before, confidence. When I won that writing contest, I realized I was capable of more than just enduring. I could create. I could build something. Even if it was just a stack of pages no one would ever read, I was shaping my world word by word. Still, I knew I couldn't just walk out the front door. The Harlans might not have been abusive in the traditional sense, but they were control freaks with a strong grip on appearances. If I left without a plan, they'd find a way to pull me back in. Or worse, send me back to my parents, people who'd already made it clear they had no place for me. So I played the long game. I kept my head down. I thanked them more often. I said grace with my eyes closed and my voice calm. I volunteered to help clean the dishes. I played the role perfectly. Because if they didn't suspect anything, I'd have a better chance of pulling it off. At school, I kept talking to Quinn. Slowly, carefully, I started telling him more. I didn't show him the notebook, but I told him I had plans. That I wasn't going to stay with the Harlans forever. He didn't ask too many questions. He just listened and nodded like he already knew I had it in me. The idea to get a job came from him. "You should try that bakery on Bellevue," he said one afternoon, passing me a note during biology. "They're hiring part-time." I saw the sign. I stared at the note, then looked up. I'd never had a job before. The Harlans gave me an allowance, but only in the form of credit to be spent through them. If I wanted to buy something online, it had to go through their account. If I wanted to go to the mall, I had to ask for cash and explain exactly what I planned to buy. But this job, it could be mine. Quietly. Secretly. I waited 3 days before going. I told the Harlans I was staying late for tutoring. Mrs. Harland beamed, thrilled that I was being academic. I walked to the bakery after school with sweaty palms and a thudding heart. The place was small and smelled like sugar and cinnamon. The woman behind the counter was middle-aged, sharp-eyed, and busy. I introduced myself and asked if she was still hiring. She looked me up and down like she was measuring how much trouble I'd be. "Weekends," she said finally. 6 a.m. to noon. No phones. You show up on time, you keep the job. I nodded. "You ever baked anything before?" I shook my head. She shrugged. "Doesn't matter. You'll be cleaning, not baking." I smiled. "I can do that." Getting the job was easier than hiding it. I told the Harlans I'd joined a weekend youth study group at school. I made a fake flyer on the library printer, complete with the school's logo and a made-up teacher's name. I even threw in a Bible quote to sell the story. They didn't question it. That weekend, I woke up at 5 a.m., tiptoed out of the house, and walked the 2 miles to the bakery. The cold air woke me up more than any coffee could. I felt alive. Exposed. Free. Work was hard. I scraped trays, mopped floors, and burned my fingers more than once. But I earned $25 that first day. Real money. Cash in my hand. Mine. I hid it in an empty tea tin in the back of my closet. I kept going every Saturday. The Harlans never found out. When they asked what I learned in the study group, I recited fake summaries of verses and made up discussions about morality and service. They ate it up. Months passed. Winter melted into spring. I turned 15. My parents didn't call this year either. No card. Not even an email. I didn't burn anything this time. I didn't need to. The fire in me was already lit. The more I worked, the more I saved. The more I saved, the more real my exit plan became. I started researching bus routes at the library. I read about emancipation laws, shelters, and youth housing programs. I wasn't ready to run, not yet. But I was close. Quinn helped me open a student checking account. We used his older sister's address to register it. I started depositing half of what I earned, keeping the rest in cash. My tea tin was getting heavy. Then something happened that almost blew it all. One Friday night, as I was brushing my teeth, Mrs. Harland knocked on the bathroom door. She didn't wait for me to answer. "Olivia," she said, stepping inside, "I found something in your closet." I froze. She held the tea tin in her hands. Open. The bills peeking out like bruises. I thought we agreed there were no secrets in this house. I stared at the mirror, my toothbrush hanging in my mouth. "I'm saving up," I said after a moment, spitting into the sink. "For college." Or something. She didn't yell. She didn't scold. She just gave me a long, tight-lipped look and said, "You don't need to hide things from us. We'll take care of you." I nodded. She set the tin on the counter and walked out. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening for footsteps, wondering if she'd go through the rest of my things. Wondering if she'd tell my parents. But nothing happened. In the morning, the tin was still there. Untouched. After that, I moved everything to a better hiding place, the hollow inside of an old stereo in the garage. Quinn helped me pry it open after school one day. I wrapped the bills in plastic and slid them inside. 2 more months passed. I worked. I smiled. I prayed when they asked. I gave them everything they wanted on the surface. Underneath, I was already gone. Then, the Harlans announced they were going on a summer mission trip to Honduras. 2 weeks. They wanted me to come. "We think it would be a wonderful experience for you," Mrs. Harlan said, clapping her hands like I'd just won a cruise. A chance to serve, to give back. I almost laughed. But I nodded. "Sounds great." Then I went to school and told Quinn, "That's my window." He knew what I meant. We spent the next week finalizing the plan. I'd say I wasn't feeling well the night before. That I had a fever, maybe food poisoning. They'd feel guilty about leaving me behind, but not enough to cancel their trip. The moment they left for the airport, I'd go to the bakery, cash in 2 weeks of pay, and catch the 2:10 p.m. bus out of town. Where to? That was the best part. I'd applied for a summer youth writing program 3 towns over. When Ms. Rowe, my English teacher, found out, she wrote me a glowing recommendation without asking too many questions. I used Quinn's sister's address again. I was accepted on a partial scholarship. Enough to cover housing. Meals were included. I just needed to get there. The night before the Harlans were set to leave, I started acting sick. Mrs. Harland fussed. Mr. Harland suggested postponing the trip. I insisted I'd be fine, that I had enough food and would call Ms. Rowe if anything happened. I wrapped myself in a blanket and pretended to nap on the couch. By the time their car pulled out of the driveway the next morning, I was already halfway through my checklist. Cash, clothes, documents, writing samples. By noon, I stood on the sidewalk outside the bakery with a backpack full of everything I owned and a heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Quinn was there. "You sure?" he asked. I nodded. "Text me when you get there," he said, slipping a folded piece of paper into my hand. I boarded the bus. The seat was scratchy and smelled like gum and dust. The driver didn't look at me twice. As the bus pulled away, I turned and looked out the window. The Harlan's neighborhood disappeared behind trees and turns. And I felt it. Not joy. Not fear. Freedom. When I opened the note from Quinn later, it said, "They didn't deserve you. Now go build the life they couldn't imagine." The bus rattled like it might come apart at every turn, but I didn't care. I was out. I watched miles of road unravel behind the window, every tree and billboard another step farther from the people who thought they owned pieces of me. I held my backpack tight, both arms around it like a life vest. Inside was everything I had: some clothes, the notebook, my ID, the last 2 pay stubs, a worn paperback novel, and a printout of my acceptance to the writing program. No one on the bus talked. A man in the seat across the aisle was asleep, mouth open. A girl a few rows ahead chewed gum with her feet up. I watched them like you watch animals in a documentary, separate, peaceful, not part of my world. Not yet. I didn't sleep. I was too wired. My nerves were lit like street lamps. I kept going over my story in case someone asked questions. If a cop boarded and wanted to know why a 15-year-old was riding alone. If the program director called the Harlans. If someone noticed I didn't have enough money to afford a round trip. But no one asked. No one cared. I was just another seat number. When we finally pulled into the small town where the writing program was hosted, the sun was low and gold. The air smelled cleaner somehow, less like expectation. I stepped off the bus and into something that felt like the beginning of a new book. The campus wasn't big, but it was beautiful. Brick buildings, trees with real shade, and windows full of flickering yellow light. The kind of place where voices echo with possibility. The dorms were plain but clean. 2 people to a room. My roommate, Hallie, had already claimed her side: tapestries, succulents, and a mountain of novels. She barely blinked when I walked in. "You Olivia?" "Yeah, I'm Hallie." "I already took the bed by the window, but you can totally use the desk lamp." "It's better." "Cool. Thanks." That was it. No interrogation. No judgment. Just 2 kids trying not to make it weird. It was perfect. The program started the next morning with an orientation in the campus library. Dozens of teenagers filled the rows of chairs, all of them looking either terrified or smug. I probably looked both. A woman in her 50s introduced herself as the director, Mrs. Kaplan, and told us we'd be writing every day: poetry, fiction, memoir, even spoken word. We get workshops, peer critiques, and at the end of the summer, we'd read something we wrote in front of everyone. My stomach turned at the idea of that last part, but I nodded like it was fine. They handed us blank notebooks and name tags. I flipped mine open and wrote on the first page, "No going back." The first week flew by in a blur of ink and nerves. The instructors didn't sugarcoat anything. If a piece was weak, they told you. If it was good, they made you revise it 10 more times. I loved it. For the first time in my life, I felt like my voice wasn't just tolerated, it was wanted. No one asked where I was from or who I lived with. They cared about my sentences, my rhythm, my truth. I wrote about a girl who disappeared and became wind. I wrote about a dog who dug up secrets in the garden. I wrote about a boy who never spoke but still made everyone listen. But eventually, my writing started shifting. It grew teeth. I wrote about girls whose parents forgot them. About houses that smiled on the outside and swallowed you whole inside. I didn't use names. I didn't say Harland. I didn't say mom or dad. But it was all there, between the lines. One of the instructors, a grad student named Simon, pulled me aside after reading my short story. "Is this real?" he asked, holding the pages gently like they might catch fire. "Parts of it," I said. He nodded slowly. "It's brutal. Beautiful. Don't stop." I walked away shaking. No adult had ever told me not to stop before. They only ever told me to slow down. Be quiet. Be grateful. It wasn't all smooth. One night, someone called my name from the dorm's shared phone in the hallway. "It's for you," Hallie said, raising an eyebrow. My heart almost dropped. I hadn't given anyone this number. I picked up the receiver like it might bite me. "Hello." "Olivia." It was Quinn's voice. Warm. Safe. My knees almost buckled. I used my cousin's cell to call the dorm. Just wanted to hear if you made it. I did, I whispered. You okay? I looked around. Students were laughing in the common room. Someone down the hall was playing guitar badly. Yeah, I'm good. There was a long pause. I miss you. I miss you too. Another pause. Then, you're gonna be something. I didn't cry until after I hung up. The next morning, I wrote a poem that made my instructor lean back in her chair and say nothing for a full minute. Then she just said, "Damn," and asked if she could keep a copy. I was building something. A version of myself that didn't apologize for existing. Each piece I wrote, each time I stood up in front of the group and read something that cracked open my ribs, I got stronger. The best part? No one tried to fix me. No one tried to call the Harlans or my parents. They treated me like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Week 4 was the halfway mark. We had a mid-program showcase, and I was chosen to read. I picked a story called Chalk Lines about a girl whose house kept shifting shapes to confuse her into staying. The ending had her climbing out the chimney and never looking back. The audience clapped. Really clapped. Some even stood. Afterward, Mrs. Kaplan came up to me. "You have something rare," she said. "You make people feel what you're afraid to say out loud." That night, Hallie offered me half her cookie without saying anything else. That was her way of saying she was proud. But the next morning, everything cracked. I woke to a knock at the dorm door. A staff member stood there, eyes cautious. "Olivia? Can you come with me, please?" My throat tightened. I followed her through the hall, down the stairs, out the main building. She didn't speak. I didn't ask. I already knew something was wrong. Inside the main office, 2 people waited for me. Not the Harlans. My parents. I hadn't seen them in a year. Maybe more. They looked older, smaller. My mom wore a soft pink blouse. My dad had the same jacket he always wore, with the frayed cuff. Neither smiled. My chest filled with static. "We just want to talk," my dad said. I didn't sit. "How did you find me?" My mom fidgeted with her purse strap. "The Harlans called when they realized you weren't with them. Said you ran off. We were concerned." Concerned. Right. "So you found me now? What do you want?" They both hesitated. My dad took a breath. "We want you to come home." I laughed. It came out dry and cracked. "You didn't even call me on my birthday. 2 years in a row." My mom flinched. "We didn't know how to talk to you." "You didn't try." Silence. The staff member looked uncomfortable. "Olivia, you're a minor. They're still your." "No," I said. "They're not." My dad's eyes narrowed. "We're not here to argue. We just want what's best." "No, you want what looks best." He stood up. "That's enough." "I'm not going back," I said, clear as glass. "You sent me away like a problem you didn't want to solve. Now you want credit for showing up." "You're 15, my mom whispered. "You don't get to decide everything." I straightened my spine. "I decided the minute you stopped being my parents." Mrs. Kaplan stepped into the room then, her face unreadable. She looked at me, then at them. "I think we're done here," she said quietly. My dad opened his mouth, but she held up a hand. "You're not taking her. Legally or otherwise. She's here on scholarship and registered. If you want to fight it, bring a lawyer. But until then, she stays." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I waited until they left before I let myself breathe. Mrs. Kaplan turned to me, her eyes soft. "You okay?" "No," I said. "But I will be." That night, I wrote everything down in my notebook. Not just what happened, but what it meant. They found me, and I didn't fold. They asked, and I said no. They tried to reclaim a daughter they threw away, and I didn't let them. That was the day I stopped writing escape plans. Because I didn't need to escape anymore. I was already free. I didn't sleep much that night. My body was exhausted, but my brain was wired, replaying every second of that confrontation with my parents. The look on their faces when I said no. The way they didn't even deny abandoning me. They just tried to reshape the narrative like they always had. I'd expected fear or guilt to creep in. Maybe even regret. But instead, I felt light. Like I'd finally put down a weight I'd been carrying since I was 10 years old. Saying no to them didn't just sever the cord. It reminded me I wasn't theirs anymore. Maybe I never really had been. The next morning, I woke early. earlier than I needed to. The sun had barely painted the windows when I pulled out my notebook and opened to a fresh page. I wrote a single line across the top. Now what? Because for the first time in my life, that question wasn't terrifying. It was open. It was mine. The program continued like nothing had happened. No one treated me differently. I wasn't the girl whose parents tried to drag her home. I was just Olivia again. The instructors pushed us harder, our assignments more complex, our critiques sharper. We were halfway through the summer and expectations were rising. One afternoon, Mrs. Kaplan asked me to stay after our group workshop. I expected another conversation about what had happened, but instead, she handed me a printed email. It was from the director of a pre-college creative writing program at a university 2 states away. They'd heard about my work through the regional writing contest I'd won back in the spring. Ms. Rowe must have shared it. The email said they were offering me a spot in their fall extension program. I'd be the youngest in the group, but they'd reviewed my writing and believed I was ready. It wasn't a full scholarship, but it was enough to cover tuition. I'd have to figure out housing and books. I stood there, frozen, reading the email 3 times before I looked up. Mrs. Kaplan smiled. It's real, Olivia. I'm only 15. They know. They don't care. They care that you can write. My chest filled with something I hadn't felt in years. Hope, yes, but something more dangerous. Possibility. I spent the next 2 weeks obsessed with logistics. I wrote out pros and cons. I calculated how much money I still had. I called Quinn, who said, without hesitation, you have to go. We'll figure it out. He even offered to help me crash with his cousin for the first month. I didn't ask twice. The hardest part wasn't deciding to go. It was knowing I'd be leaving this place. The dorm, the late-night writing sessions, Hallie's terrible instant ramen, the way the instructors treated me like a peer. I didn't want to leave, but I knew I had to. Life was moving, and I had to move with it. The final week of the program was emotional for everyone. We'd become a little family, one built out of stories and survival and caffeine. On the last night, we each had to read a final piece in front of everyone, family or not. Some cried. Some froze. Some soared. I went last. My piece was called Inheritance. It was about silence passed down like heirlooms. About families that gave their children shame instead of shelter. It was about choosing your own name. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They just sat in the quiet. And then applause. Not polite. Real. Like thunder breaking after a long drought. Afterward, Mrs. Kaplan hugged me. You know what I think, she whispered. I think they lost the best thing that ever happened to them. I left that night with a certificate, a stack of printed stories, and a small scholarship check for my work. But more importantly, I left with a clear answer to the question I'd written weeks before. Now what? Now I go build my life. The day after I got back to Quinn's cousin's house, I signed the acceptance form for the fall writing program. I used an old Chromebook to fill out the online forms, and when I hit submit, I stared at the confirmation page until my eyes blurred. The university wasn't close. It was a 6-hour bus ride, and classes started in less than a month. I spent every day after that working double shifts at the bakery, barely sleeping, eating leftovers and instant soup. I didn't care. I was counting every dollar like it was another brick in the foundation of my future. One evening, while closing the bakery, the manager, Tammy, called me into her office. You've been killing yourself lately, she said, handing me an envelope. I opened it to find a bonus. Not much, but more than I expected. I asked around, she said. Told a few regulars what you were working toward. A couple chipped in. I blinked back tears. Why? I asked. Because you're good, Olivia. And because you don't wait for someone to save you. You show up. 2 weeks later, I was on another bus. This one felt different. Not an escape. A beginning. The university wasn't glamorous. The dorms were older. The sidewalks cracked. But the people there didn't look at me like I was a kid. My classmates were 17, 18, some already applying for MFAs. But they listened when I spoke in workshop. They read my stories and gave honest feedback. Some even asked for copies. I'd never felt so out of place and yet so exactly where I needed to be. The hardest adjustment was independence. I had no safety net, no backup plan. If I failed, I fell hard. But that also meant every success was fully mine. I wrote like I was on fire. Some nights I stayed up until 3 a.m., finishing stories I wasn't sure anyone would ever read. I wrote about girls who were both the victims and the heroes. I wrote about boys who apologized too late. I wrote about homes with no doors. The stories got better, sharper, messier, more true. One afternoon, my instructor, Professor Ely, pulled me aside after class. "You've got something," she said. "But you already know that." I nodded. "You ever think about submitting?" "Submitting? To journals. Contests. Don't wait. You're ready now." The idea scared me, but in a thrilling way. Like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you might be able to fly. So I did it. I submitted 3 short stories to 3 different youth writing contests. It took me hours to perfect the cover letters. I spent 20 minutes deciding what font to use. Then I hit send. And waited. Weeks passed. My class workload got heavier. I started helping out in the writing lab to earn a little extra money. I lived off coffee and hope. Then, one afternoon, I checked my inbox and found a message that made my breath catch. "Congratulations! Your story, Inheritance, has been selected as the national winner for the Young Voices Fiction Prize." The prize came with publication in an online journal, a $500 award, and an invitation to read at a National Youth Literary Conference in Chicago. I read the email 3 times. Then I screamed. I called Quinn. I called Ms. Rowe. I told Hallie. I told Tammy. I even emailed Mrs. Kaplan. But I didn't tell my parents. They didn't deserve to know. The conference was a whirlwind. Bright lights, sharp microphones, teenagers in blazers quoting Virginia Woolf like scripture. I felt like an imposter at first, but when I stood at the podium and read my story to a crowd of strangers and saw them cry, really cry, I knew I belonged. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The next day, a woman from a small publishing press approached me and asked if I had a collection in the works. I didn't. But I said I will. Because now I understood something I hadn't before. You don't have to wait for someone to choose you. You can choose yourself. Chicago was colder than I expected. Not just the air, though that bit through my coat the second I stepped out of the airport, but something sharper too. A kind of loneliness that hung around even when you were surrounded by people. Still, I loved it. It was alive. Every street corner buzzed with stories. Every building looked like it had something to say. The conference put us in a hotel that had soft beds and scratchy towels. I shared a room with another finalist, a girl named Noor from New Jersey. She wore headphones most of the time and highlighted everything in neon green. She didn't talk much, but on the second night, after I read her one of my pieces, she just nodded and said, "You've got a rhythm. Don't lose it." I wrote that in my notebook. The reading was held in a library that looked like a cathedral. Arched ceilings, stained glass windows, rows of people in neatly pressed clothes. I should have been terrified. But when they called my name and I stepped up to the microphone, all I felt was calm. I read a piece called "The Window Stayed Locked," about a girl whose bedroom window never opened, no matter how hard she tried. She thought it was broken. Turns out, her parents had sealed it shut. When I finished, no one moved for a second. Then applause. Real, thunderous applause. Afterward, a woman approached me. She was maybe in her 40s, dark curls, blazer sharp enough to slice paper. She handed me a card and said, "I'm an agent. If you ever finish a collection, I'd like to see it." I stared at the card for a long time after she left. An agent. A real one. Me. I didn't sleep much that night, but not because I was anxious. I was electric. I stayed up in the hotel room writing outlines, fragments, new ideas. I wrote until my fingers cramped. When the conference ended, I rode back to the university on the same bus I had arrived in months ago. But I wasn't the same girl. Back on campus, life settled into a new kind of rhythm. Class, writing lab, weekend open mics. I picked up a few freelance gigs typing papers and editing college essays. The money helped, but more than that, it made me feel capable. Adult. Like I could actually do this. I started piecing together a collection. 10 stories, all connected by a single thread: girls who outgrew the rooms they were given. I called it things I wasn't supposed to say. Each story was personal, but not all autobiographical. Some were twisted fairy tales. One was set in a future where parents auctioned off their children's names to corporations. One was about a girl who carved escape plans into tree bark until the trees bled. They were dark, sharp, but real. I sent the manuscript to the agent from Chicago with shaking hands. I expected silence. A polite no. Instead, she emailed me 2 weeks later. Let's talk. I had to borrow a professor's office to take the Zoom call. My heart beat so loudly I thought it might echo through the walls. She didn't waste time. You've got a voice, she said. A rare one. If we tighten some of the middle stories, smooth the arc, this could sell. Sell. It sounded fake. But she wasn't joking. She sent over a contract the next day. I didn't sign right away. I spent 3 days reading every word, Googling every term. I asked a law student friend to look it over. Finally, when I felt sure, I signed. I printed out the last page and taped it to my dorm wall, right above my desk. The agent shopped it around for 3 months. I tried not to think about it. I poured myself into classes, into the writing lab, into small things that felt safe. And then it happened. A mid-sized publisher made an offer. A real advance. Not huge, but enough to pay for rent, food, and a little breathing room for a year. I stared at the email for 20 minutes before I called Quinn. He picked up on the second ring. What's wrong? He asked immediately. Nothing, I said. I think I just got a book deal. He screamed. I screamed. We laughed until I cried. I called Mrs. Kaplan next. Then Tammy. Then Hallie. And still, I didn't tell my parents. They didn't deserve this part of me. Not long after, I received an email from my mother. It was short. Just 4 lines. _ we heard about your book. Congratulations. We're proud of you. Maybe we can talk sometime, _ I closed the email. Didn't respond. What would I say? Thanks for abandoning me. Turns out it was the best thing you ever did? No. They weren't part of the story. Not the real one. Not the one I built from the ashes they left behind. That fall, I moved out of campus housing and into a tiny studio with a leaky radiator and a view of the alley. But it was mine. I painted the walls yellow and set up a secondhand desk by the window. On the shelf above it, I placed the tea tin. The same one I used to hide my bakery money. Now it held royalty statements and printed drafts. I began working with an editor on the manuscript. She pushed me hard, cut entire paragraphs, questioned every metaphor. And I loved her for it. Each revision made the story sharper, braver. I added a new final story, about a girl who returns to her childhood home and finds it smaller, the doors too narrow for who she's become. We titled it simply, Not Yours Anymore. The book was scheduled for release the following spring. In the months that followed, I started receiving small bursts of attention. A blog post here. A tweet from a bigger author. A podcast invitation. Someone even made fan art of a scene in one of my stories and tagged me on Instagram. I saved it to my phone. One day, I got an email from my high school. They wanted to feature me in their alumni newsletter. I almost laughed. They'd never noticed me before. Not really. Not until I became something marketable. Still, I said yes. Because there were girls still stuck in that school, living out stories like mine. And maybe if they saw my name, read even a sentence of my journey, they'd know they weren't alone. Then, just a month before the release date, I got another email. From my father. It was longer than my mother's. Almost apologetic. He wrote about missing me. About making mistakes. About wanting to reconnect. And then, we'd like to come to your book launch. Just to support. Nothing more. I sat with that sentence for hours. I thought about how they never came to school plays, never called on birthdays, never showed up when I needed them. I thought about the night I ran, the day they tried to drag me back, the silence that followed. But then I also thought about the version of me that used to pray they'd change. And how that version didn't exist anymore. I didn't reply. When the book came out, it sold more copies in the first week than anyone expected. I did interviews, sat on panels, signed copies for kids who told me this story. It's mine too. At the launch event in the city, the room was packed. Quinn was there, front row, beaming. Tammy sent flowers. Mrs. Kaplan sent a note, told you. When it was my turn to speak, I stood behind the podium and looked out at all the faces. Some I knew. Most I didn't. All of them waiting to hear my words. I opened my mouth. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was telling a sad story. I wasn't reliving pain. I was showing what came after. I was holding up proof that it didn't end in a stranger's house, or on a bus, or in a bedroom with a locked window. It ended here. Or maybe it began here. When the applause faded and the event ended, I walked outside into the cool air. The city buzzed around me, alive and endless. I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. At the top, I typed, Chapter 1. Spring came early that year. The cold had barely loosened its grip on the city when green buds started pushing through the gray, stubborn and unapologetic. Like they knew they belonged here now. Like they weren't waiting for permission. I knew the feeling. By then, the book had been out for 6 weeks. The reviews were still coming in, some glowing, some cautious. A few critics called it emotionally raw to a fault, which honestly made me laugh. That was the point. The best responses weren't from critics, though. They were from readers. Messages poured into my inbox and DMs every day. Teenage girls, young men, single moms, people who'd grown up with silence, with strangers, with stories they weren't allowed to tell. This book felt like someone finally saw me. I read the last page and cried because I thought I was the only one. You made me feel like I could say something too. I saved every one of them. Not long after, I was invited to speak at a public high school on the South Side. The librarian who invited me said they'd been passing my book from desk to desk like contraband. I was nervous. More than I had been at the book launch or on any podcast. These weren't publishing professionals or supportive adults. These were kids who could smell fake from across the street. I couldn't mess this up. The auditorium was small and dim. Rows of metal chairs, buzzing fluorescent lights. Maybe 50 students showed up, slouched and whispering, arms folded, waiting for me to prove I wasn't another adult selling hope like gum. I stood behind the podium, adjusted the mic, and didn't bother with a script. I'm Olivia, I said. When I was 15, I ran away from the people who were supposed to raise me. Silence. A few lifted heads. I lived with people who didn't know me. Went to a program I wasn't supposed to be at. I wrote a lot of angry stories. And I stopped waiting for someone to save me. A girl in the third row nodded, just once. Like I had said a secret out loud. I didn't know how to fix what was broken around me. So I wrote what I could. And little by little, that writing made something new. Something that was mine. The rest of the talk is a blur, questions, quiet claps, a few laughs when I told them about the roaches in my first studio apartment. Afterward, a boy waited until the room was nearly empty. He was tall, quiet, holding my book like it might vanish. My mom kicked me out when I came out, he said. I lived in a shelter for 3 months. I just looked at him, heart in my throat. Your story. I didn't think someone like me would ever get to read that. I signed his copy. Wrote, you belong. You're the story now. After that, I started visiting schools more regularly. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. If someone had walked into my classroom at 15 and said half the things I was saying now, maybe I would have left earlier. Maybe I would have stopped believing the lies faster. It became my version of healing. Not forgiveness, but forward. One afternoon, after speaking at a school in a nearby suburb, I received a message on my author website from someone named Erin Harland. At first, I thought it was spam. But the name stopped me cold. Harland. The same last name as the family who'd taken me in. Who'd eventually given up and called my parents. The same people I'd fled. The message was brief. Asterisk Hi Olivia. You probably don't remember me. I was 8 when you stayed with us. I always wondered what happened to you. I read your book. It made me cry. I hope you're okay. You don't have to write back. Just wanted you to know I remember you. Asterisk. Erin. I stared at the screen for a long time. I did remember her. Messy braids. Always asking me to help her with her spelling. I used to read to her when her parents weren't home. I didn't know how to respond. So I didn't. Not right away. I walked to the park instead. My usual thinking spot, a bench near the water, quiet except for the ducks. What did it mean that she reached out? Did she know what happened after I left? What her parents said? Did she still live with them? Was she okay? 100 versions of a reply came and went. Some kind, some angry, some unfinished. Eventually, I wrote back. Kyerin. I do remember you. I used to braid your hair and you'd beg me to read you the book about the flying dog. Thank you for reading my story. I'm okay now. I hope you are too, Olivia. She replied a week later. Said she lived with her grandmother now. That her parents split. That she always wondered why I vanished and only understood years later when she started asking questions. She said she was proud of me. That was all. And somehow it was enough. That spring, the press released the paperback edition of my book, and I recorded the audiobook myself. Hearing my voice in headphones across the country was surreal. Some said my reading made it hit even harder. Others said it made them cry on the subway. I started working on a second book. This time, a novel. Not directly about me, but rooted in themes I knew all too well: abandonment, resilience, self-made family. It followed a girl who faked her own death to escape a toxic household and started over in a town where no one knew her name. I wrote most of it in the same yellow-walled studio apartment, sitting cross-legged with tea and snacks and pages taped to the walls like a conspiracy theorist. I worked part-time at a youth shelter to stay grounded. To remember that stories were more than books. They were kids in bunk beds, teens with nowhere to go, people just trying to exist without being punished for it. And then, one day, I got another message. From a reporter. Apparently, my book had been selected for a national high school curriculum list. Suddenly, people wanted to talk. Articles. TV spots. A Netflix producer emailed me about adaptation rights. I froze. Everything was moving so fast. I forwarded the email to my agent with the subject line, "Is this real?" She replied, "Yes, and it's only the beginning." With her help, I negotiated the rights carefully. I wanted a say in the script. I didn't want them turning my pain into a teen drama cliché. I wanted the messy parts left in. The silence. The rage. The defiance. To my surprise, they agreed. I wasn't rich, not by a long shot. But I could breathe now. Pay rent early. Send Hallie money when her dog needed surgery. Donate anonymously to the shelter that once gave me a bed for 2 nights. And then, once again, my mother wrote. This time, she sent a letter. Real paper. Handwritten. It was longer. Apologetic again. She said she had read the book twice. That she cried. That she wished things had been different. That she was sick. That she hoped we could talk. I held the letter in my hands for a long time. Part of me wanted to rip it up. Part of me wanted to run to her. To show her everything I'd built without her. But mostly, I felt nothing. And that scared me. Not because I wanted revenge, but because there was a time when her words could have leveled me. Now, they were just ink on paper. I didn't respond. Instead, I wrote a scene in my novel where the main character receives a letter from the mother she thought was dead. And she burns it. Not out of hate, but because she no longer needed anything from it. Writing that felt like exhaling after years underwater. Summer came, and with it, an invitation to speak at a conference in New York. Big names. Famous writers. Me, somehow, among them. I flew in 2 days early, stayed in a tiny overpriced hotel, and tried not to psych myself out. But on the morning of my panel, as I stood in front of a mirror in a borrowed blazer, I looked at myself and smiled. I wasn't scared, because I knew exactly who I was. The girl they sent away. The girl they forgot. The girl who built herself a voice loud enough to be heard in rooms they'd never be invited to. So yeah, I wrote a book. A real one. People read it. A lot of people. The week it dropped, I did interviews, panels, live streams. My inbox filled with DMs from readers saying things like, "This saved me," or "I didn't know someone else felt like this too." I was invited to high schools, youth centers, a podcast that used the phrase trauma-informed literary genius and made me cringe a little, but also maybe cry a little too. And I kept telling myself, you did it. You made it out. You turned it into something. But here's the thing no one tells you about escape. Even when you run, some of it sticks. I still had dreams where I was locked back in that guest room at the Harlans, the wallpaper too white, the silence too loud. I'd wake up with my heart racing, mouth dry, gripping the blanket like it might vanish. And I still hadn't responded to the last message from my mother. Her letter sat at the bottom of my tea tin under old royalty statements and scribbled outlines. I hadn't touched it since the day I read it. I didn't need to. I knew every line. Every "I'm sorry" and "I wish things had been different." I didn't believe her. And worse, I didn't care. And that scared the hell out of me. Not because I wanted to forgive her, but because there was a time her voice could gut me like a fish. And now it was just noise. Distant. Faded. I kept telling myself I was fine. I mean, on paper, I was thriving. I got a speaking agent. I signed with a mid-sized publisher for book 2, this one a novel. I rented a slightly less crap apartment that didn't smell like boiled socks. I did readings in cities I'd never even been to growing up. I met authors I used to Google in the library. One of them even blurbed my second book. I should have been walking on air, but I wasn't. Because success doesn't cancel survival mode. There were days I couldn't answer emails. Days I'd go to the store and freeze in the snack aisle because someone bumped into me too hard and said sorry in a tone that sounded just like my dad. There were nights I'd scroll through Instagram and see old classmates, kids who never knew what I was going through, posting baby photos and wedding announcements with their moms in the frame. Moms who still remembered their favorite color or how they took their tea. And I'd feel this sharp, petty grief. Like I'd lost something I never even had. Sometimes I'd text Quinn. "Is it dumb I'm still angry?" And he'd write back. "No, it's human." I told myself I didn't miss them. And I didn't, not really. But I missed what I should have had. I missed the version of life I was never given the option to live. And then, just when I thought things were finally starting to level out, I got an email that flipped me inside out. It was from a woman named Claire Weller. She said she worked for a documentary production company. They'd read my book. Someone on her team had passed it around. They wanted to do a limited series about runaways who made it. The subject line was, "We think your story could help others." I stared at it for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Ms. Rowe, my old English teacher. The one who first submitted my writing to that contest back in high school. The woman who saw me when I barely existed. She picked up after 2 rings. "Olivia?" "Yeah," I said. "Hey." She laughed. "God, your voice sounds older." "That's weird." I laughed too, and then I cried a little. Not the loud kind. Just the kind where your voice stutters, and you realize you haven't said your own name out loud to someone who remembers it from before. I told her about the email. The docuseries idea. The cameras. The people digging into my past. "You don't have to do anything," she said gently. "You're not a cause. You're a person." "I know," I said. "But maybe it matters. If one girl sees it and thinks, hey, maybe I can get out too then. Then you'll save her," Ms. Rowe said. "Like you saved yourself." So I agreed to a meeting. Just a conversation. No commitments. Claire turned out to be kind, which honestly made me more suspicious. She didn't ask for trauma porn. She didn't push for the worst parts. She just said, "Tell me what matters." And I did. I told her about the Harlans. The card on my 14th birthday. The guest room with no posters. The fake prayers and filtered internet. The bakery job. Quinn. The tea tin. The bus. I told her about the dorm where I first breathed right. About Ms. Kaplan. The yellow walls. The first time someone said, "You don't have to go back." And I told her about now. The book. The silence from my parents. The occasional emails I never answered. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "We don't need to dramatize this. You've already survived the drama. Let's tell the truth." That's what made me say yes. Not the money, though I won't lie, it helped me finally fix the busted radiator. Not the exposure. The truth. The filming started a month later. And that's when it got complicated again. Because documentaries dig. They want footage. They want phone calls. They want names. One day, I got an email from production. "We've reached out to your birth parents for optional interviews. Just a heads up." I stared at that sentence for 10 minutes. Then I threw my phone across the room. I didn't sleep that night. What if they said yes? What if they showed up with perfect hair and polished lies, telling the world we always did what we thought was best, while I stood there shaking, holding the wreckage? I called Quinn the next morning, my voice hoarse. They're reaching out to my parents. Silence on the line. Then, do you want me to burn the studio down? I laughed. I needed that. The crew promised they wouldn't use anything I didn't approve, that no one could force an interview into the cut. But it still rattled me. The next week, I got a voicemail. From my dad. I hadn't heard his voice in over 10 years. It was short. Hey, Olivia. We heard about the project. We'd be willing to talk. If you think it would help. Help what? His conscience? His image? His hope that maybe, just maybe, he could sneak back into the narrative now that it's marketable? I deleted the voicemail. Then I sat down at my desk, opened a fresh doc, and titled it, "You Don't Get to Rewrite Me." Because I realized something right then, staring at the blinking cursor. I wasn't scared of them anymore. Not their words. Not their voices. Not their "we tried our best" garbage. I had already written myself into the world. They didn't get to edit it now. The documentary came out in late spring. They called it Not Yours, Stories of Escape. I didn't love the title at first, but it grew on me. The trailer dropped on a Tuesday morning. I was making tea in my kitchen, black, no sugar, still bitter, still mine, when my phone started vibrating nonstop. Mentions. DMs. Texts from people I hadn't talked to in years. Even my old landlord sent a thumbs-up emoji. The trailer was short. 30 seconds. A soft piano score. A montage of kids, teens, really sitting in empty rooms, staring just off camera. Then my voice. I was 12 when my parents decided I didn't belong to them anymore. I didn't cry watching it. I thought I would. Instead, I just sat there. Not frozen. Not triggered. Just still. Like I was holding space for that version of me. The one with too much silence in her lungs and not enough name on her lips. The series went live 3 weeks later. 4 episodes. I was in the second and the last. In my episode, they used footage of me walking through the campus where the writing program had been. I sat on the same bench outside the library. The one where I first wrote "No Going Back" in a blank notebook. They filmed inside the old bakery too. Tammy cried on camera and tried to laugh it off. She used to mop floors like she was cleaning a crime scene, she joked. You could eat off those tiles. The episode ended with me reading from Inheritance at a school auditorium. A group of teens sat in the front row, heads tilted like sunflowers. The camera lingered on their faces, their eyes. And then it cut to black. People lost their minds over it. In a good way. It blew up online. Reviews called it honest, devastating, necessary. One article said, "This is the kind of story that reminds you why books matter." That sentence stayed with me. Because that's what I'd always wanted. Not pity. Not fame. Just to matter. To prove that my story, messy as it was, deserved to be seen. Heard. Remembered. A week after this series dropped, I got a letter. Not an email. A letter. From Mrs. Harland. I stared at the envelope for a full day before I opened it. It was handwritten. Slanted cursive on cream paper. A few lines stood out immediately. I watched the documentary. I didn't recognize you at first. You're so grown. So sure of yourself. I didn't know. Or maybe I did and didn't want to admit it. I'm sorry. I hope you believe that. Erin's doing well. She remembers you more than I thought she would. I read it 3 times. I didn't cry. But I didn't throw it away either. I folded it gently, placed it in the same tea tin that used to hold my bakery money. Right next to my mother's old letter. No response. No closure. Just witness. That was enough. You'd think that would be the end of the story. But it wasn't. Because just when I thought I had finally climbed out of the past, something happened that knocked me flat again. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. Unknown number. Normally, I'd let it ring out. But something in me itches, maybe intuition, said pick up. So I did. Olivia? That voice. That name. Not Ms. Lennox, not author, not ma'am. Just Olivia. Yeah, It's Hallie. From the writing program. Summer dorms. The cookie thing. I froze. Then laughed. Hallie? Holy crap, how are you? Her voice cracked. Not great. That's kind of why I'm calling. She told me her younger cousin, 16, queer, kicked out, had read my book in a shelter library. They'd found each other again recently. Hallie had taken them in. He's quiet. Scared. But he talks about your story like it's a lighthouse. I felt my throat tighten. Can I send you his info? I think he needs to know it's real. That it's possible. I said yes. Of course I did. A week later, I got an email from him. Just a few lines. I don't know what to say. Just thanks. I didn't think people like us got to grow up. But maybe we do. I replied. That exchange turned into a Zoom call. Then another. Then a few late-night chats where he showed me his stories. Raw, jagged things. Full of ghosts and girls with no names. He reminded me of myself years ago. Afraid of taking up space. But still writing anyway. Eventually, I asked if I could send him a box of books. He said yes. I sent 10. All inscribed. One had a sticky note inside that said, "The world lied. You are not too much. You are just in the wrong room." That's when the idea hit me. It came like a punch and a prayer. What if I started something? Not just writing. Not just speaking. Something real. A nonprofit. A small one. For youth who've been kicked out, pushed away, erased. A space for stories. For survival. For what comes after. I called it Exit Plans. We launched a website. Held free workshops. Offered small scholarships to help kids afford writing programs, journals, even therapy. I partnered with shelters, schools, libraries that used to blacklist the word trauma. It wasn't big, it wasn't shiny, but it was real. And when the first round of teens finished the program and stood up in front of a crowd to read their work, I sat in the back and cried so hard I couldn't see straight. Not because I was sad, because they were still here. Because I was still here. And somehow, despite it all, we were building something that hadn't existed before. People still ask me why I never sued my parents. Why I never exposed them harder. Dragged them through court. Fought for some kind of official justice. Here's the truth. I didn't need the system to validate my pain. I didn't want to spend another second of my life begging for someone to believe me. Instead, I chose something else. I chose to live. Loudly. Fully. Without permission. And when the next letter came, this time from my father, again, I didn't even open it. I just wrote one sentence on a post-it and stuck it to my wall above my desk. You had your chance. And below it, in my own handwriting. This life? Not yours anymore. I'm not telling this now because I need applause. I'm telling it because someone somewhere is 12. Or 15. Or 28. And thinking they'll never be anything more than what was done to them. I need you to hear this. That's not the end. You are not a broken project. You are not a shame story. You are not theirs. You are yours. And what you build from here. That's chapter 1. Write it loud. Write it messy. But write it.